and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. My parents have lived in the same house since I was 6 years old, and for most of my childhood, that house was simply home. It was the place where I grew up, where I learned the layout of every room, every hallway, every creak in the floor, and every sound the house made at night. When you live somewhere from such a young age, the place becomes part of you in a way. You know how the stairs sound when someone walks up them. You know which doors stick, which windows rattle in the wind, and which parts of the house feel warm or cold at different times of day. That kind of familiarity is supposed to make a house feel safe. And during the day, for the most part, it did. It looked normal. It felt normal. It was just my parents' house, the same house they had chosen when I was a little kid. But at night, especially when I was upstairs in my bedroom trying to fall asleep, that house became something else entirely. Growing up, I always felt like something was violently shaking my bed when I would try to go to sleep. I do not mean I felt a small vibration, or that the mattress settled, or that the old house made normal noises that a child could mistake for something scary. I mean it felt like someone, or something, had taken hold of the bed and was shaking it on purpose. It did not feel random. It did not feel like pipes, wind, or the floor shifting. It felt directed. It felt personal. It felt like whatever was doing it wanted my attention. That was the worst part. Even as a child, I had this strong thought that if I acknowledged its existence, if I spoke to it, looked for it, called out, or even let it know I knew it was there, then something bad would happen. I did not know what that something was. I had no clear picture in my mind. I only knew that it would not be good. That feeling was not like normal childhood fear of the dark. Kids get scared at night. They imagine monsters in closets, faces at windows, hands under beds, and all the usual things. But this was different because there was a rule attached to it. A rule I felt in my whole body, even though no one had ever told it to me. Ignore it. Do not react. Do not peek. Do not speak. Do not give it what it wants. I was absolutely sure that the bed was being shaken specifically to make me say something or look out from under the blankets. It felt like a test, or like bait. If I gave it even the smallest reaction, it would know it had me. I know that sounds strange, especially coming from an adult looking back, but as a child, it felt completely clear. I did not understand what it was, but I understood that I had to pretend it was not happening. So I fell asleep every night, completely covered from head to toe in blankets. That became my way of surviving the room. It did not matter if it was hot. It did not matter if the air under the blanket felt thick or uncomfortable. I would pull the blanket over my head and tuck myself inside like I was hiding from the world. I did not leave my face out. I did not leave my feet out. I made sure there was no gap where I might accidentally see something, or something might see me. It became a nightly routine, but not a comforting one. It was not like a child building a cozy little nest. It was more like someone locking themselves inside the only shelter they had. I would lie there under the blanket, breathing quietly, trying to stay still, trying not to show fear while the bed shook beneath me. Sometimes I would tell myself it was nothing. I would try to be reasonable in the way a child can be reasonable. Maybe the house was old. Maybe someone was walking somewhere else and making the floor move. Maybe a truck passed outside. Maybe my own heartbeat made the mattress feel like it was moving. But those explanations never lasted long because the feeling was too strong. The bed did not just tremble. It shook with force, as if something was trying to get me to respond. I could feel the movement through the mattress and through my body. The frame seemed to rattle. The blankets around me would feel like they were moving with it. I would close my eyes hard and tell myself not to move, not to breathe too loudly, not to make a sound. As I got older, it got worse. That is another part that makes it hard for me to explain away as a simple childhood fear. Most kids grow out of things like that. The dark becomes less scary. The closet becomes just a closet. The strange shadows become normal furniture. But this did not fade as I got older. If anything, it became stronger. The shaking seemed more intense, and the fear attached to it became heavier. There were nights when it honestly felt like my bed was being lifted off the ground. I cannot say for certain that it was, because I never looked. I never peeked out from under the blanket, not once. That was part of the rule. If I looked, I would be acknowledging it. If I looked, I would be giving it permission to do whatever came next. So I stayed hidden, even when the movement felt impossible. I would lie there, certain that the bed was rising or being shoved or pulled, and I would not move. The feeling in those moments was not just fear. It was dread, complete and total dread. It felt like life or death, even though I could not explain why. There were no words in my mind like, I am going to die. It was deeper than words. It was the kind of fear animals must feel when they sense a predator nearby. My body knew I had to stay still. My body knew I had to ignore it. I would sweat under the blanket and feel too hot, but I would not uncover even my face. I would sometimes hold my breath without meaning to, then force myself to breathe slowly because I was afraid any sign of panic might count as a reaction. It sounds ridiculous in daylight, but at night, in that room, it felt like the most important thing in the world. For years, I carried that experience mostly as my own private childhood terror. I knew what people would say if I explained it. They would say sleep paralysis. And honestly, that is what I thought too once I got older and learned more about it. Sleep paralysis seemed like the easy answer. It can make people feel like something is in the room. It can make people feel pressure, movement, danger, or a presence they cannot see. It can be terrifying and feel completely real. So for a long time, I tried to place my childhood memories into that box. Maybe I had been half asleep. Maybe my body had been frozen while my mind imagined the shaking. Maybe the bed never moved at all. Maybe it was just my brain misfiring at the edge of sleep. That explanation helped a little because it gave me something normal to hold on to. It made the memory feel less impossible. But then, when I was in my early 20s, I brought a lady friend home to meet my parents. Because we did not want to make baby Jesus cry, she stayed in my bedroom while I slept downstairs on the living room sofa. That was the arrangement. It was a little funny, a little awkward, and completely normal for visiting parents. She got the bedroom, I took the sofa, and we all went to sleep. Nothing about that night seemed like it was going to drag all of my old childhood fear back into the open. I was older by then. I was not a little kid hiding under blankets anymore. I had mostly convinced myself that whatever I experienced in that room had been sleep paralysis, nightmares, childhood imagination, or some strange mix of all three. I did not warn her about the room. Why would I? I did not want to sound insane, and I did not truly expect anything to happen to her. The bed shaking was part of my past, or at least I wanted to believe it was. The first night, everything seemed fine at first. We went to bed, her upstairs in my old room and me downstairs on the sofa. I fell asleep like normal. The house was quiet. There was no reason to think anything was wrong. Then, sometime around 3 or 4 in the morning, she woke me up. She was furious. At first, she thought I had been shaking the bed and trying to scare her. She was angry in that sharp, half-asleep way people get when they think someone has played a cruel joke on them in the middle of the night. I remember being confused because I had been asleep downstairs. I had not gone upstairs. I had not touched the bed. I had not done anything. For a moment, she was mad, and then I think she realized I really had been asleep. She could see I was not pretending. I was groggy, confused, and clearly not in the middle of a prank. Her anger changed almost immediately into fear. That shift scared me more than the anger had. She asked me what was going on in that room. She said it felt like the bed had been lifted off the ground and shaken. Not just shaken a little. She described it like something wanted to throw her onto the ground. Those words hit me hard because she had described the thing I had felt for years. She did not know about my childhood experience. I had not planted the idea in her head. I had not told her the room was strange. She went into that room with no warning and woke up describing the same kind of violent bed movement that had haunted me as a kid. That was the moment the sleep paralysis explanation stopped feeling good enough. I know people can have strange sleep experiences in unfamiliar places. I know guests can wake up scared in an old house. I know dreams can feel real. But what are the chances that someone with no knowledge of my childhood fear would sleep in that same bed, in that same room, and wake me up accusing me of shaking it, then say it felt like the bed had been lifted and shaken like something wanted to throw her to the floor? That was too close. It was not vague. She did not say she had a bad dream. She did not say she felt watched or heard a noise. She described the bed moving violently, the same thing I had felt again and again for years. That confirmation did not make me feel better. It made everything worse. Before that, I could tell myself it had all been in my head. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe it was a child's imagination. Maybe I had remembered it as worse than it was. But after she experienced it too, I had to face the possibility that something was actually happening in that room. Maybe not something supernatural, but something outside my own mind. Something connected to the room, the bed, or the house. And if it had happened to her too, then all those nights I spent under the blankets as a child suddenly felt less like irrational fear and more like instinct. The strangest thing is that even now, at 43, I still hate being in my parents' house by myself. I do not like being upstairs alone there, even if other people are downstairs. That house still has a hold on me that no other place does. It is not because I am easily scared of old houses. I live by myself in a creaky old house now, and I do not have any issue with it. My own house makes noises. It settles. It creaks. It has dark corners and old house sounds, but they do not bother me. I can walk through it at night without feeling like I need to run. I can sleep there alone. I can hear a floorboard pop or a pipe knock and not immediately feel dread. So it is not just old houses. It is that house, my parents' house, that upstairs area, that room. There is something about being there that brings back the same feeling I had as a child. Even if nothing happens, the memory is waiting. I can be upstairs and suddenly feel like I do not want to turn my back on the hallway. I can be alone in the house and feel that old pressure in my chest. that sense that I should not draw attention to myself. It is strange to be a grown man and still feel marked by a room from childhood. I can reason with myself all I want. I can say I am 43, I live alone, I am not afraid of every noise, and I do not believe every strange memory means something paranormal. But my body remembers that room differently. My body remembers hiding under blankets, feeling the bed shake, and knowing I must not look. I have tried to think of normal explanations. Maybe there was something structural in the house. Maybe vibrations traveled through the floor from heating, plumbing, traffic, or some appliance. Maybe the bed frame was loose and amplified small movements. Maybe I had some kind of recurring sleep disorder, and my lady friend happened to experience something similar due to stress or unfamiliar surroundings. Maybe there is an explanation that would make perfect sense if someone inspected the room carefully. I do not want to jump straight to ghosts or demons or anything like that. I really do want a rational answer. But none of the simple explanations fit cleanly. A little vibration does not feel like a bed being lifted. Pipes do not make you feel like something wants to throw you to the ground. Sleep paralysis does not explain another person having the same experience in the same room without knowing your story. What stays with me most is the feeling that it wanted attention. That was always the impression I had as a child. The shaking did not feel like a random side effect of something else. It felt like a demand. Look at me. Say something. Admit I am here. And I never did. I never gave it that. Maybe that was childish thinking, but it felt like survival. My lady friend, on the other hand, did not know the rule. She did not know to hide under the blankets and pretend nothing was happening. She woke up angry, thinking I was doing it, and then became scared when she realized I was not. Maybe that is what makes her experience so unsettling to me. She reacted like a normal person would react if a bed started moving. I reacted like someone who had been trained since childhood not to react at all. I do not know what was in that room. I do not know if anything was in that room. Maybe the answer is buried in some ordinary detail I have never found. But I know what I felt, and I know what she felt. I know I spent years falling asleep with blankets over my head because I believed acknowledging whatever shook my bed would lead to something worse. I know the shaking grew stronger as I got older, to the point where it felt like the bed was being lifted. I know that years later, someone else slept in that room and came downstairs furious and scared because the same thing had happened to her. And I know that even now, decades later, I can live alone in a creaky old house without fear. But I still do not like being upstairs alone in my parents' house. That is the part I cannot shake. Childhood fears usually fade when you grow up. Mine did not fade completely, because one night in my 20s, someone else confirmed the thing I had spent years trying to explain away. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe it was something physical in the house. Maybe it was something I do not have a name for. Whatever it was, it made a child hide under blankets every night. And years later, it made an adult guest wake up, convinced the bed was being shaken hard enough to throw her off. So that is fun, and not at all terrifying. At around 13 or 14 years of age, my mom's partner and his kids moved in with us. There was a big change in the house, the kind of change that shifts the whole feeling of a place almost overnight. Before that, it had just been us, with our normal routines and our normal way of living. Then suddenly there were new people in the rooms, new voices in the hallway, new habits, new arguments, new footsteps. And that strange awkwardness that comes when two families are trying to become one household. His daughter was about the same age as me, So in a way, it made sense for us to spend time together. His son was about the same age as my little brother, maybe 6 or 7. So the younger kids had each other too. It was not always easy, but at that age you adjust because you have to. You get used to sharing space, sharing the television, sharing attention, and pretending you are fine with changes you did not choose. I had lived in that house long enough by then that I knew its sounds and its moods. I knew the way the floorboards creaked in certain places, the way the heating sounded, the way the kitchen felt different late at night, and the way shadows moved along the hallway when lights from outside passed through the windows. I was not a child who jumped at every noise. I was not walking around terrified of the house. In fact, the strange thing I saw there never really scared me when I was younger. It was just there. It had been part of the background of my life for so long that I did not question it much. That sounds strange to say now, because as an adult I understand how odd it is. But when you are a child, and something happens often enough, you start to treat it as normal, even if it is not. For years, I would see a shadow figure in the house. I do not mean I saw it once during a nightmare, or caught a quick shape out of the corner of my eye and turned it into something bigger in my imagination. I mean I saw it again and again, often enough that it became familiar. It was not a full person in detail. It was more like a dark shape, small like a child, and it moved through the same area of the house many times. The place I remember most strongly is the kitchen and the hallway around it. Sometimes it seemed to be near the kitchen doorway. Sometimes it seemed to move across the space as if it had somewhere to go. It was not tall like an adult. It had the size and shape of a little boy. That was the impression I always had, even before anyone else said it. A small shadow, child-sized, quick and quiet. I did not talk about it. I cannot say exactly why. It was not because someone told me not to. And it was not because I had some dramatic secret I was keeping. I think I simply did not know how to bring it up. When something is part of your daily life from a young age, you do not always realize other people are not experiencing the same thing. Also, children are careful in ways adults forget. You learn quickly what sounds believable and what does not. If I told an adult I saw a shadow boy moving around the kitchen, they would probably say it was my imagination, or that I was tired, or that I had seen a coat, or a reflection, or a trick of light. So I said nothing. I watched it, noticed it, and carried on. Then one night, for some reason, I decided to tell my mom's partner's daughter about it. I do not remember exactly what made me bring it up. Maybe we were talking in the way teenagers do late at night, when the house is quiet and people start sharing things they would never say in daylight. Maybe something happened that reminded me of the figure. Maybe I had seen it again and finally wanted to know whether anyone else had noticed it. Whatever the reason, I started to tell her. I think it was the first time I had ever spoken about it to anyone. That alone made the moment feel strange. The words felt awkward coming out of my mouth, like I was saying something I had kept hidden without meaning to. I began to explain that there was a shadow figure I would see in the house. I could not even get the full sentence out before she got excited. She cut in almost immediately, saying something like, "Oh my God, I see that too. It's a wee boy." She said it with such certainty that it stopped me cold. She was not confused. She was not pretending to understand. She knew exactly what I was talking about before I even had time to describe it properly. That moment changed everything for me. Until then, the figure had been something private, something I had quietly accepted but never examined. Hearing someone else say they saw it too made it real in a different way. It was no longer just something inside my own head. It was something another person had seen, and not just any person, but someone who had only recently moved into the house. She had no reason to know about it from me. because I had never spoken about it before. Her reaction sparked a curiosity in me that I had never really felt about the figure before. For the first time, I started asking questions. If she had seen it, maybe others had too. Maybe it was not just me. Maybe it had been there all along, seen by different people at different times, silently moving through the house while everyone lived around it. I went to my little brother and asked him about it. I expected him to be confused, or maybe to laugh, or to ask what I meant. Instead, he responded like I had asked him about something completely ordinary. He said, yeah, the shadow boy in the kitchen. He said it as if I had asked about a chair, or a cupboard, or a pet we all knew was there. No fear, no surprise, no big reaction. Just a simple answer. The shadow boy in the kitchen. That casual response unsettled me more than if he had been scared. He was only around 6 or 7, and to him it seemed like a normal fact of the house. He had seen it too, and apparently he had accepted it in the same quiet way I had. That made at least 3 of us. Me, my mom's partner's daughter, and my little brother. 3 kids in the same house had seen the same small shadow figure, and none of us had sat together, making it up beforehand. I asked the other boy too, my mom's partner's son, the one around my brother's age. He had never seen it. That detail is important to me because it makes the whole thing feel less like a shared game or a group story. If all of us had immediately agreed and started adding details, maybe someone could say we were just feeding off each other. But he had not seen it. He did not join in. He did not pretend. He simply had no experience with it. Then I asked the adults. None of them had seen anything. They did not take it seriously. They thought we were making it up, or being silly, or maybe trying to scare each other. From their point of view, that probably made sense. A group of kids talking about a shadow boy in the house sounds exactly like the kind of thing kids would invent. But from our side, it was not a game. At least, not for me. I had seen it too many times before that conversation ever happened. The adults dismissing it did not stop me from thinking about it. If anything, it made the mystery stronger. Why had the kids seen it, but not the adults? Why did my little brother know exactly what I meant? Why had the girl who moved in seen the same thing without me ever telling her? Why was the kitchen the place we all seemed to connect with? Those questions did not have answers, and over time they stayed with me more than the fear did. Because again, at the time, I was not terrified. It is strange to admit that, because if I saw something like that now, I would probably react very differently. But as a child, I did not have the same adult need to explain everything. Children can live beside the strange more easily. They can accept things because their world is already full of things they do not fully understand. Adults want categories. Adults want reasons. Adults want proof. Children just notice and move on. I am a 40-year-old man now, and I consider myself fairly rational. I do not go through life believing every strange sound is a ghost. I do not spend my time looking for paranormal explanations. In fact, I do not really believe in ghosts. I have never been someone who automatically accepts stories about spirits or hauntings. I think most strange things probably have normal causes. Shadows, reflections, tired eyes, old houses, overactive imaginations, memory changing over time, people influencing each other without meaning to. All of those explanations are possible in many cases. I understand that. I believe in looking for the simple answer first. But this is one thing from my childhood that I still cannot explain. What troubles me now is not that I saw a shadow figure once. A single sighting could be dismissed. It could have been a trick of light, a half-dream, a moment of confusion. What troubles me is that I saw it as a repeated, daily kind of phenomenon. It was not a one-time scare. It was part of the house. I saw it enough that I knew where it usually appeared and what shape it seemed to have. Then, when I finally mentioned it, another child knew about it before I could describe it. Then my little brother confirmed it in the most casual way possible, calling it the shadow boy in the kitchen. That combination has never sat right with me. If it was only in my head, why did they see it too? If it was only imagination, why did our descriptions line up without planning? If it was only shadows in the house, why did it appear to some of us and not others? The fact that it did not scare me then almost makes it scarier now. Back then, I accepted it because I had no choice. It was just something that happened. Now, as an adult, I look back and realize how strange that is. I was living in a house where a child-sized shadow figure appeared often enough that multiple children recognized it. We talked about it like it was something real, while the adults dismissed it. And then, life went on. No big investigation, no dramatic ending, no priest, no medium, no explanation. We just lived there with that unanswered thing moving through the background. I have often wanted to go back to that house and see if it still happens. The thought has crossed my mind many times over the years. I wonder who lives there now. I wonder if they have children. I wonder if anyone in that house still catches a small shadow moving near the kitchen. I wonder if some kid living there today has quietly noticed the same thing and has not told anyone because they think they are the only one. I wonder if the new owners ever feel watched in the hallway, or if they hear movement where nobody is standing, or if their own children have a name for something the adults cannot see. The curiosity is still there because the question has never been answered. But of course, I cannot exactly knock on the door and ask to walk through their hallway. New owners would probably phone the police if a strange man showed up saying he used to live there and wanted to check whether the shadow boy was still in the kitchen. I would not blame them. It would sound completely mad. There is no normal way to ask that question. So I suppose I will never know. The house has gone on without me, and whatever was happening there either stopped, continued, or was explained by something I never discovered. That is the part I struggle with most, not knowing. I am not looking for a dramatic answer. I do not need someone to tell me it was definitely a ghost. In fact, I would almost prefer a normal explanation, something practical and clear. Maybe there was a strange lighting effect in the kitchen. Maybe headlights from passing cars made a child-shaped shadow move across the wall at certain times. Maybe there was some reflection from a window, a mirror, or polished surface that created the illusion. Maybe the layout of the house caused shadows to stretch in a way that looked like a small person. Maybe children are simply more likely to notice moving shapes and turn them into figures. Maybe one of us influenced the others without realizing it, even though I still cannot remember ever speaking about it before that night. I have thought of all those possibilities, and some of them sound reasonable from a distance, but none of them fully explain the experience as I remember it. They do not explain the certainty in the girl's voice when she said she saw it too. They do not explain my little brother's completely normal reaction, like the shadow boy in the kitchen was common knowledge. They do not explain why it felt like a repeated daily thing rather than a random trick of the light. And they do not explain why the memory still feels so clear after all these years. I do not believe in ghosts, but I also do not believe in pretending something makes sense when it does not. This is one of the few experiences in my life that sits outside the box. I can talk around it, question it, doubt my memory, and search for logical answers, but the core of it remains the same. As a child, I saw a small shadow figure in the house. Another child saw it too. My little brother saw it and knew it as the shadow boy in the kitchen. The adults saw nothing and thought we were making it up. I grew up, became a rational man, and still cannot explain what happened. It did not scare me when I was young, but it kind of scares me now. Not because I think it was definitely a ghost, and not because I believe something evil was in the house. It scares me because there is a blank space where an explanation should be. It scares me because multiple children saw the same thing and treated it as normal. It scares me because I can still remember that feeling of the house, the kitchen, the hallway, and the small, dark figure that moved through it like it belonged there. And after all these years, I still do not know what we were seeing. If someone can offer an explanation for what happened, I would honestly welcome it. I would like there to be a simple reason. I would like to be able to look back and say, that was just a shadow from the street, or that was a reflection, or that was how kids process a strange house. Maybe one of those answers is true. Maybe the explanation is completely ordinary and I just never found it. But until I do, the shadow boy in the kitchen remains one of the strangest memories of my life, and the one thing from childhood that my rational adult mind still cannot put away. When I was about 17, me and two of my friends were on a road trip headed toward Death Valley. At that age, a road trip felt like freedom in its purest form. We were young enough to feel almost untouchable, young enough to think being far from home in the middle of nowhere was exciting instead of dangerous. We had a truck, some money, music, snacks, and that restless teenage feeling that makes empty roads seem like an adventure waiting to happen. Death Valley already had a strange kind of pull to it. Even the name sounded like something out of a warning. It was the kind of place people talked about, with a mix of respect and curiosity. A huge stretch of desert where the land felt older than anything human. We were not thinking that deeply at the time, though. We were just three friends driving through the night, laughing, talking, and enjoying the feeling of being away from everything familiar. One night during that trip, we ended up on a desolate stretch of highway where there was almost nothing around us. It was not just quiet. It was empty in a way that felt unreal. We could drive for 20 minutes without seeing another car. No headlights coming toward us. No red taillights ahead. No gas stations glowing in the distance. No houses, no signs of people, no towns, no movement except our truck cutting through the darkness. It was just the road, the stars, and the black desert around us. The sky was huge out there, bigger than it ever looked back home. Without city lights blocking everything, the stars seemed to spread forever in every direction. The darkness on the ground was just as deep. It pressed in from both sides of the highway, and beyond the reach of our headlights, the land disappeared completely. At first, the emptiness was fun. We were talking and joking, probably trying to scare each other a little, because that is what you do when you are young and driving near a place like Death Valley at night. The road ahead was lit only by our headlights, and the rest of the world felt like it had fallen away. There is a certain feeling you get on a road like that, where you realize how small you are. The truck suddenly feels like the only safe thing in the world. This little moving box of light and noise surrounded by miles of silence. If something went wrong out there would be nobody around to help. No one would even know right away. But when you are 17, that kind of thought does not fully settle in until something happens. At some point, we saw a rotating light behind a hill. It was the only light for miles, and that alone made it stand out. In a place where there had been nothing but darkness, even a small light would have caught our attention. But this was not just a steady light, like a building or a tower. It rotated. It moved in a slow, repeating pattern, brightening the darkness behind the hill and then fading again, like something was turning over and over on the other side. We could not see the source of it, because the hill blocked our view. All we could see was the glow rising, sweeping against the back of the hill, lighting it from behind in a way that looked strange and out of place. It did not belong there. That was the feeling I had right away. Out in the middle of nowhere, on a highway where we had not seen another person for ages, there was this hidden, rotating light behind a hill. At first, none of us knew what to say. We all saw it, and for a moment, the truck got quieter. I remember staring toward it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It could have been some kind of tower, maybe a beacon, maybe equipment, maybe a facility. That would have been the normal explanation. But normal explanations do not always feel normal when you are surrounded by desert in the middle of the night. The light seemed too isolated. There was no other sign of anything around it. No line of road leading to it that we could see. No buildings, no other lights, no sound. Just that steady rotation, flashing against the hill again and again like a signal. As we got closer, curiosity started to take over. We were young and dumb enough to think getting a better look was a good idea. We stopped the car and tried to see what was behind the hill. We sat there for a moment, watching the light move. The truck's engine, the night air, the sound of us shifting around inside the cab, all of it felt louder because the world outside was so quiet. We could not see anything except the glow on the back of the hill. The source stayed hidden. That made it worse, but it also made us more curious. If we had been able to see a tower or a building right away, maybe we would have laughed it off and kept driving. But because the hill blocked everything, our minds filled in the blank space with questions. So we decided to head toward the hill. Looking back, that was the kind of decision you make when your fear has not caught up with your common sense yet. We got out and started moving toward it, leaving the safety of the truck behind. I remember the desert air and how open everything felt. The darkness was different outside the vehicle. Inside the truck, we had headlights and doors and glass between us and the night. Outside, there was nothing separating us from the silence. Every step away from the truck made me more aware of how alone we were. The rotating light kept going behind the hill, steady and patient, like it did not care whether we were coming closer or not. It just kept sweeping through the dark. We started up the hill, trying to get high enough to see over it. The ground was uneven, and we were probably trying to be quiet, even though there was no reason to think anyone could hear us. There is something about sneaking toward an unknown light at night that makes you act like you are trespassing, even before you know you are. Then we ran into a barbed wire fence. That stopped us right away. The fence was not just some little ranch fence or an old broken barrier. It was enough to make us understand we were not supposed to go farther. There was a sign on it, and while I do not remember the exact wording after all these years, it said something like government property. No trespassing. Trespassers will be shot. Whether those were the exact words or not, the message was clear. Stay out. Do not cross. This is not a place for you. Seeing that sign changed the whole feeling of the situation instantly. A rotating light behind a hill was strange. A rotating light behind a hill on government property in the middle of the desert, with a warning that trespassers could be shot, was something else entirely. We were freaked out. Whatever excitement we had felt turned into a hard jolt of fear. Suddenly, we were not just curious teenagers exploring a weird light. We were three kids standing in front of a barbed wire fence at night, near government land, with no idea what was behind the hill, and no idea who might be watching us. The desert felt bigger in that moment, and the darkness felt closer. We did not debate it. We ran back down the hill toward the truck. The whole time, the light was still rotating behind us. It did not stop. It did not change. It kept sweeping against the hill like nothing had happened. When we got back to the truck, we were breathing hard and trying to laugh in that nervous way people laugh when they know something is wrong but do not want to admit how scared they are. We were standing near the truck, trying to decide what to do next. Part of us wanted to leave immediately, but part of us still wanted to see what the light was. That is how curiosity works, especially when you are young. Even after the warning sign, even after running back down the hill, we were still drawn to it. We were about to climb into the bed of the truck to get a better view, thinking maybe from there we could see a little higher over the hill, or at least get a clearer look at the glow. Then, out of the darkness directly behind us, we heard a flute. That was the moment everything changed. It was not distant. It was not faint. It was crystal clear, like someone was standing right next to us and playing a little melody. The sound came from behind us, from the darkness where there had been nothing a second before. It was a strange little flute melody, the kind of sound you might hear in a video game like Zelda, something light and simple, almost playful. But there was nothing playful about hearing it out there. Not in that place. Not at that time. Not right behind us when we were alone on a deserted highway near a warning sign and a hidden rotating light. The sound was so clear that none of us could pretend we had imagined it. It was not the wind. It was not an animal. It was not a squeaking truck part. It had notes. It had a melody. It sounded intentional. Someone, or something, had played a flute right behind us in the dark. For a split second, we froze. It was the kind of fear that hits so fast your body does not know what to do first. My skin went cold. My stomach dropped. I could feel the blood rush through me like my whole body had suddenly understood we were in danger. The desert around us had been empty, or at least we thought it had been. We had not heard anyone walking. We had not seen anyone. There were no cars, no houses, no people, no reason for a flute to be playing right beside us. And yet there it was, clear as day, right behind us. Instantly, all three of us ran for the truck. There was no discussion. No one said, "Let's check it out." No one tried to act brave. Whatever part of us had wanted to look at the light was gone. We scrambled into the truck like our lives depended on it. Doors slammed. Someone yelled. The engine roared. My friend hit the gas, and the truck fishtailed, kicking up dust as we tore away from that spot. We were all screaming, "What the fuck was that?" over and over, because none of us had an answer. The truck slid and jerked as we sped back onto the road, and the whole time I expected to see something in the mirrors. I expected a person standing where we had been. I expected the light to move. I expected something impossible to come out of the darkness behind us. But all I could see was dust and night. We did not stop again, not anywhere near there. The fear inside the truck was different from normal fear. It was not like being scared by a movie or even being startled by a noise. It was the fear of realizing the world had suddenly become unfamiliar. A few minutes earlier, we had been joking around on a road trip. Then we had seen a rotating light behind a hill, found a government warning sign, and heard a flute melody right behind us in the middle of nowhere. There was no way to make those things fit together in a normal way. We kept asking each other what it had been, but none of us knew. The more we talked, the stranger it felt. For a while after that, we probably told the story like teenagers tell stories, with a mix of excitement and fear. But as time passed, life moved on. We got older. We had jobs, relationships, responsibilities, and other memories took up more space. The Death Valley road trip became something from the past, and that one strange night became one of those stories that sits in the back of your mind. I did not think about it every day. I did not obsess over it. Sometimes it would come up, and I would remember the rotating light, the fence, the warning sign, and that flute. But for the most part, it stayed buried. About 30 years passed. Then, about a year ago, I was watching a Netflix documentary about an incident in the 1990s where around 60 kids in Zimbabwe witnessed a UFO. I had heard bits and pieces about that case before, but I had never paid close attention to it. In the documentary, they interviewed some of the kids who had seen it. They were adults by then, but many of them still seemed deeply affected by what had happened. There was one interview that hit me in a way I was not expecting. One of the kids, clearly still traumatized, kept talking about the noise of it. The interviewer asked her what it sounded like. She said, "A flute." The moment she said that, the memory of that night came back so hard it felt like the air left the room. I was not prepared for it. 30 years had gone by, and suddenly I was 17 again, standing beside that truck in the desert darkness, hearing that crystal clear little melody right behind me. A flute. That one word connected to something I had never been able to explain. It did not prove anything, of course. I know that. It did not prove that what we saw was a UFO, or that the rotating light had anything to do with something not from this world, or that the sound behind us came from the same kind of thing those kids described. But it shook me because it was so specific. Of all the sounds that girl could have said, she said a flute. Not a hum, not a buzz, not a whistle, not a machine, not wind. A flute. I sat there thinking about that night in a way I had not thought about it in years. The rotating light behind the hill. The fact that it was the only light for miles. The government property sign. The warning about trespassers. The way we ran back to the truck. The timing of the flute, right when we were about to climb into the bed and look again. It was as if something wanted us to leave. That is the part that still makes my skin crawl. The flute did not come when we first saw the light. It did not come when we were walking toward the hill. It came after we reached the fence, ran back, and were about to try getting a better view from the truck. It came at the exact moment when we were still curious enough to stay. And it worked. We left immediately. I do not know what we almost saw that night. Maybe it was some military test site or government facility. Maybe the rotating light was part of a tower, radar equipment, or some kind of installation hidden behind the hill. Maybe the flute had a human explanation too. Maybe someone was out there messing with us. Though that idea almost feels stranger because we were in the middle of nowhere and saw no sign of anyone. Maybe sound traveled in some weird way across the desert. Maybe there was another person nearby we never saw. I have tried to be reasonable about it. I do not want to turn every strange experience into something supernatural or alien just because I cannot explain it. But I also know what it felt like. I know how empty that road was. I know how alone we were. I know what the light looked like behind that hill. I know what the sign said. And I know that the flute came from directly behind us, clear and close, when nobody should have been there. That memory has never fully left me, but hearing that girl in the documentary say the same word changed how I think about it. It made the whole thing feel connected to something larger and stranger than just 3 teenagers getting scared in the desert. Maybe the connection means nothing. Maybe it is just a coincidence. But it does not feel like nothing when you are the one who heard it. It does not feel small when a detail you have carried for 30 years suddenly appears in someone else's story from the other side of the world. To this day, I can still hear that little melody in my mind. It was short, clear, and wrong for the place we were in. A flute belongs in music, in a room, in a game, in a performance. Maybe even around a campfire if people are gathered there. It does not belong behind you in total darkness on a deserted highway near Death Valley. After you have just found a government warning sign and watched a hidden light rotate behind a hill. That sound cut through the night like it had been placed there just for us. And maybe that is what scares me most. Not the light by itself, not even the fence or the warning sign. It is the feeling that something knew we were there, something close enough to stand right behind us, unseen, and play a melody that sent all three of us running for our lives. 30 years later, I still do not know what it was. I only know that we all heard it, we all reacted the same way, and none of us stayed to find out what was waiting behind that hill. "31 years ago, in December, I was at my mom and dad's house. It was one of those cold, dark winter evenings where the whole world outside feels shut down early, like the day has ended before you are ready for it. The sky had already gone black, the windows looked like mirrors, and the house had that deep winter quiet inside it, the kind that makes every small sound feel a little louder than normal. I had gone up to my old room in the attic, the room I had slept in when I was younger, and at some point I must have drifted off without meaning to. It was not a heavy sleep at first, more like the kind of sleep you fall into when the house is warm, your body is tired, and you know you are somewhere familiar. I remember the attic room feeling the same as it always had, a little removed from the rest of the house, tucked away under the roof, with the old angles of the ceiling and that strange feeling all attic rooms have, as if they belong partly to the house and partly to somewhere else. I do not remember dreaming. I do not remember hearing anything strange while I was asleep. The first thing I remember clearly is waking up to my mom calling me down for dinner. It was around 5:30 in the evening, but because it was December, it already felt much later. Her voice came up through the house, ordinary and familiar, calling me the way she always had. There was nothing unusual in her tone, nothing that warned me, nothing that made me feel like I was about to see something I would still be thinking about decades later. I sat up, still a bit groggy, and for a moment I had that strange feeling you sometimes get after sleeping in the late afternoon, where you do not know what time it is or how long you have been gone. The room was dim, and the air felt cool around the edges, even though the house itself was warm. I got myself together and headed down from the attic, moving through the small, familiar spaces I knew so well. Every step was normal. Every part of the house was exactly where it should have been. The attic stairs, the landing, the way the light fell in the hallway, the sound of voices and movement from below. It was all ordinary family life, the kind of scene you never expect to become important in your memory. I was just going downstairs to have dinner with my parents. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I was about to turn left into the kitchen. That was the natural way to go, and I could hear that dinner was already being eaten or served. But before I turned, I glanced to my right toward the living room, and that was when I saw him. My dad was standing in the doorway of the living room. At least, that was what I thought at first. He was facing away from me, looking into the room with his body angled slightly forward. His right hand was holding onto the door jamb like he needed it to support himself. He was not walking in, and he was not coming out. He was just standing there, fixed in that one place, staring into the living room. I only saw the right side of his face, but it was enough to make me stop. Something about him was wrong. I do not mean wrong in the way a person looks when they are sick or tired. It was stranger than that. There was something in his posture that made me pause before I even understood why. He looked as if he had seen something terrible inside that room. He looked frozen, almost like he could not make himself move another step. For a few seconds, I simply stood there and stared at him. I could not understand what had caught my attention so strongly, but I knew something was off. My dad was a familiar person to me. I knew the way he stood, the way he moved, the way he carried himself around the house. This looked like him, but at the same time, there was something about the scene that did not feel right. He was not speaking. He was not reacting to me coming down the stairs. He did not turn his head or acknowledge me at all. He just kept staring into the living room. The light in the hall and the light coming from the kitchen made enough of his face visible that I could see his expression from the side, and it looked almost anguished. That is the best word I can use for it. There was pain in it, or shock, or dread. It was the kind of expression a person might have if they were looking at something they did not want to see, but could not look away from. At the time, the first thought that came into my mind was that maybe he was watching something awful on the television. Maybe some terrible news had come on. Maybe there had been some accident or tragedy being shown. That was the only normal explanation my mind could reach for. But even that did not really fit, because there was no sound coming from the living room that I can remember. No television noise, no voices, no music, no sign that anything was happening in there. He was just standing in the doorway, holding on to the frame with his right hand, looking into the room as if something inside it had broken him. I remember feeling confused more than scared at first. The fear had not fully formed yet. It was more like my mind was trying to place what I was seeing, trying to match it to something normal, and failing. I only paused for a short time, maybe a few seconds, but in my memory it feels stretched out. I can still picture him there, the angle of his shoulders, his hand gripping the door jamb, the way he did not move, the partial view of his face. That expression that did not look like any expression I had expected to see on him in a normal evening at home. I did not call out to him. I do not know why. Maybe because I assumed I would see him again in a second. Maybe because dinner was waiting. Maybe because part of me already did not want to interrupt whatever I thought he was looking at. I turned back to the left and walked into the kitchen. It was only a few steps, nothing more. And there was my dad, sitting at the table, eating his dinner. For a moment, my mind could not catch up with what I was seeing. I had just seen him in the living room doorway. I had seen him clearly enough to recognize him. And now, he was in the kitchen, seated, with food in front of him, as if he had been there the whole time. There was no way he could have moved from the living room doorway to the kitchen table that fast without me seeing or hearing him. The layout of the house did not allow for that kind of trick. I had turned away for only a moment. He could not have gone past me. He could not have slipped around another way. He was just there, eating dinner, completely normal. I turned around almost immediately and looked back toward the living room doorway. There was nobody there. The figure was gone. The doorway was empty. The place where I had just seen my dad standing was now just a doorway, nothing more. I remember feeling a shock go through me, but it was a quiet kind of shock. Not screaming, not panic, just that cold drop inside your stomach when you realize something has happened that should not have happened. I looked at my dad, then back toward the hallway, then at my mom. My dad seemed completely normal, like he had no idea anything had happened. He was not pale or disturbed. He was just eating. I asked, probably in a confused and shaken way, if he had just been standing in the living room doorway. He looked surprised by the question. Not guilty, not like he was pretending. Truly surprised. He told me he had not. He had been in the kitchen. That was when I told them what I had seen. I said I had come down from the attic, looked toward the living room, and seen Dad standing there in the doorway, facing away from me, holding onto the doorframe, staring into the room. I said I had seen the side of his face and that he looked upset, almost like something awful was in front of him. My dad looked very surprised when I said it. My mom did not. That was almost more unsettling than the sight itself. She did not react the way I expected her to. She did not laugh it off. She did not tell me I must have been half asleep. She did not look at me like I was being dramatic. She looked as if what I had said fitted into something she already knew, something she had been carrying quietly for a long time. Then she told us that she had been seeing a male figure around the house for years. She said it was not my dad. She did not say it in a way that sounded like she was trying to scare me. She said it plainly, like someone admitting a truth they had learned to live with. A male figure had been around the house. She had seen him before, more than once, for years. I do not remember every detail of what she said after that, because my mind was still stuck on the fact that I had seen someone who looked like my dad, and yet my dad had been sitting in the kitchen the whole time. At the time, I did not know what to do with it. What can you do with something like that? You can tell yourself you were tired. You can tell yourself you had just woken up and your eyes were playing tricks on you. You can tell yourself it was a shadow, or a coat, or a trick of the light, or your brain filling in a shape where there was nothing. But none of those explanations ever felt right. I had not seen a vague shape. I had seen my dad, or something that looked enough like him to stop me in my tracks. I had seen him standing in a very specific way, with one hand on the door jamb, staring into the living room with a look of pain on his face. Still, life goes on. Strange things happen, and if they do not repeat immediately, you push them away because you have to. You eat your dinner. You talk about other things. You leave the room. Days pass. Weeks pass. Eventually, it becomes one of those stories you remember but do not fully understand. It sits somewhere in the back of your mind. Not forgotten, but not solved either. About 18 months later, my brother died in a motorbike accident. There is no easy way to say that. Even now, after all these years, the words still feel heavy. He had died 2 days before, and we were all in that state people are in after a sudden death, where everything feels unreal and too real at the same time. The house was the same house, but it was not the same anymore. The air in it had changed. Every room felt different. Every normal object seemed wrong because he was no longer part of the world that contained them. We were waiting for the undertakers to set up my brother's coffin in the living room. That was the room where he would be laid out, and we would have to go in and see him. It is hard to describe the dread of that kind of moment, unless you have lived it. You know what is behind the door. You know you have to face it. But your whole body resists. Your mind wants one more second before the truth becomes visible. The undertakers came and did what they had to do. They moved quietly and respectfully. There was a carefulness in the way they behaved, the kind of professional gentleness people use around families who have just been broken. They set everything up in the living room. My brother's coffin was placed there, and then they left us to it. I remember them closing the living room door discreetly, giving us privacy, giving us space, leaving us alone with what came next. After they left, we were all in the kitchen. The same kitchen where I had seen my dad eating dinner 18 months earlier after seeing that figure in the living room doorway. But now there was no ordinary dinner, no normal family evening, no sense of the house being safe and familiar. There was only the knowledge that my brother's body was in the next room. Nobody rushed to go in. How could we? We were all standing there, trapped between needing to see him and not being able to bear it. Then my dad took the first step. He walked from the kitchen toward the living room door. I was just a few steps behind him. I remember watching him as he moved, and I remember the terrible silence around us. When he reached the living room door, he opened it, and then he stopped. He did not go in. He just stood there in the doorway, unable to continue. His body froze. His right hand held onto the door jamb. The moment I saw him standing like that, something inside me went cold. I kept walking because I was behind him, and because everything was happening in that strange, heavy way that grief makes things happen. As I moved past him, absolutely terrified of what I was about to see, terrified of viewing my brother's corpse, a thought came into my mind with a force that almost stopped me. I had seen my dad stand there and do that once before. I had seen that exact posture before. The hand on the door jamb, the body facing into the living room, the inability to move forward, the look of anguish, the terrible stillness. But where? When? For a few seconds, my mind searched for it, and then the memory opened up fully. 18 months earlier, December, cold and dark outside. I had woken up in my old attic room, come downstairs for dinner, glanced right, and seen what I thought was my dad standing in that same doorway, facing into the same living room, holding on to the same door jamb, with that same awful look on the side of his face. Only that time, my dad had been in the kitchen. The thing I had seen 18 months before had not been some random figure after all. It had not just been a strange male presence in the house. It had looked like my dad in a moment that had not happened yet. It had shown him standing in the living room doorway, frozen with grief, unable to step inside because his son's coffin was in that room. I do not know how to explain that. I do not know if it was a warning or an echo from the future or something in the house replaying a moment before it had even taken place. I do not know if the male figure my mom had seen for years had anything to do with it, or if what I saw was something different altogether. All I know is that I saw my father in that doorway long before the moment actually happened. I saw him looking into the living room with a face full of pain before any of us knew there would one day be a coffin in there. I saw the shape of a grief that had not arrived yet. And when the real moment came, when my dad stood there holding onto the doorframe, unable to walk forward, I understood why the figure I had seen that winter evening had looked so anguished. It was not watching something terrible on the television. It was looking at the place where my brother would be lying 18 months later. It was looking into a future none of us could have imagined. It was standing in the doorway of a room that, for one terrible day, would become the hardest room in the world for my family to enter. Let me hold the story right there for a second. You know how the dark creeps in slow. Well, so does a channel like this one. It grows one listener at a time, one night at a time. And that's where the subscribe button comes in. The bell beside it makes sure the dark always finds you when a new story is ready. No pressure. Just an open door. Now let's pick up where we stopped. I was once driving on a crowded freeway in the middle of the afternoon. It was not late at night, not foggy, not stormy, and not one of those moments where the world already feels strange before something happens. It was broad daylight, the kind of normal afternoon where everything around you is so ordinary that you barely pay attention to it. Cars were packed around me in every lane. People were driving home, heading to work, running errands, or doing whatever people do in the middle of an average day. The freeway went right through the center of my hometown, so it was a road I knew almost by memory. I had driven it more times than I could count. I knew where the lanes narrowed, where people usually merged badly, where the traffic slowed, and where the road started to rise. There was one particular section that went up and over a hill with a fairly steep incline. It was not some mountain road or anything dramatic, but the slope was sharp enough that when you were driving up that part, all you could really see over the top was the sky. That section had always stood out to me a little, but only in a normal way. When you begin the climb, the road ahead seems to disappear into the sky. For a few seconds, it feels like you are driving upward into nothing but blue. You cannot see what is beyond the peak until you reach it. I had gone over that hill probably 1,000 times in my life, and every time it was the same. The freeway would rise, the cars ahead would tilt upward, the horizon would drop out of sight, and the windshield would fill with sky. Then you would pass over the top, the road would appear again, and everything would continue as usual. It was so familiar to me that I never thought twice about it. I could almost drive that stretch on autopilot. My hands knew the curve. My eyes knew where to look. My body knew how the car felt as it climbed. On this day, I was making that same trip again. Nothing about the day felt unusual. There was traffic, but not the kind that brings everything to a stop. It was the normal, crowded freeway traffic, where everyone is still moving, but everyone is close enough that you are aware of them. Cars in front of me, cars behind me, cars on both sides, sunlight on windshields, brake lights flickering here and there, the dull hum of tires on the pavement, the low rush of engines around me. I remember feeling ordinary, maybe even bored. It was just another drive through my hometown. I had no reason to expect anything strange. I was not tired enough to be hallucinating. I was not daydreaming deeply. I was watching the road because traffic demanded attention. Everything was clear and normal. As I started the ascent up that familiar hill, my view slowly became more and more sky. That part always made the world feel open for a moment, because the incline blocked most of the road beyond the peak. I could see the cars ahead of me climbing too, their roofs and rear windows framed against the blue. The sky looked normal at first, bright, open, and plain. There might have been a few clouds, but nothing that stands out in my memory. What I remember most is that my eyes were naturally lifted toward the top of the hill because that is where the road was taking me. I was looking ahead, like any driver would, and then it happened. The sky flashed white. It was not like lightning. That is the first thing I need to make clear. It was not a natural flash, not the kind of bright flicker you might see during a storm or from sunlight reflecting off glass. There was no thunder, no clouds building, no storm in the area, and nothing about it felt like weather. It was also not like someone shining a light into my eyes. It was bigger than that. The whole sky in front of me seemed to flash, like the world itself had blinked. It was sudden and total, and for the briefest moment, everything above the hill turned white. The closest way I can describe it is the flash of a computer rebooting itself. That sounds strange, but it is exactly what came to mind. It was like when an old monitor glitches, turns bright, and then resets. It had that artificial quality to it. It did not feel like light coming from somewhere. It felt like the image of the sky failed for a second, like the sky was a screen, and the screen had just refreshed. The whiteness was not warm or golden like sunlight. It was cold and blank, the kind of white you see when electronics fail or when a screen loads incorrectly. It lasted only a moment, maybe less than a second, but it was long enough for my brain to register it clearly. And in that flash, I saw something like grid lines in the sky. That part is what still bothers me the most. If it had only been a flash, maybe I could have explained it away more easily. Maybe a reflection, maybe a sudden glare, maybe some weird trick of light bouncing off a windshield or building. But the grid lines were there. They were faint, but visible, almost like the structure behind the sky had shone through for a split second. They looked organized, not random. Straight lines, crossing or forming a pattern, like something digital or mapped out. I do not remember them in perfect detail because it happened so fast, but I remember the impression they left. It was like seeing the framework of something that was never meant to be seen. The sky did not just get brighter. It revealed something. Then it was gone. The blue sky came back as if nothing had happened. The road was still there. The cars were still moving. The freeway still rose toward the top of the hill. Everything returned to normal instantly, so fast that it almost made the moment feel unreal. There was no lingering light, no sound, no shaking, no change in traffic, no reaction from the world around me. It was like someone had switched the sky off and on again, and only I had noticed. I freaked out. I did not scream or slam the brakes because I was on a crowded freeway and I had to keep control of the car, but inside I panicked. My body reacted before I could think. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My heart jumped hard in my chest. For a second, I felt like I had lost my place in reality. I kept driving because I had no choice, but my mind was racing. What was that? Did I just see that? Did the sky actually flash? Did I really see lines? I glanced around at the other drivers, expecting to see people slowing down, looking confused, leaning forward, or reacting in some way. If something that big had happened in the sky, surely other people had seen it too. There were cars all around me. Dozens of people had to be looking in the same general direction because we were all climbing that same hill. The sky was right in front of everyone. But nobody else seemed to have noticed anything. That made it worse. If everyone had reacted, I think I would have felt scared, but also relieved. At least then, I would have known something had happened outside of me. But the drivers around me kept going like nothing had changed. The car in front of me did not brake suddenly. The cars beside me did not swerve. Nobody slowed down. Nobody looked around. No one seemed startled. The freeway continued with its normal rhythm. Engines humming, tires rolling, traffic flowing up and over the hill. The world had returned to its usual shape, and I was the only one sitting there feeling like I had just watched reality glitch. I kept scanning the cars around me. I looked at the driver to my left, then to my right when I could. I watched the brake lights ahead. I checked mirrors. Nothing, every face I could see looked normal. Every car kept moving. It felt impossible. How could something that big happen and no one else notice? Had they all missed it somehow? Were they distracted? Was the angle only right from my position? Did something reflect into my windshield in a way that made it look like the sky? I wanted a simple answer, but none came. For the rest of the drive, I could not relax. I kept looking at the sky, waiting for it to happen again. I expected another flash, another whiteout, another glimpse of those grid lines. But the sky stayed normal, blue, ordinary, and calm. I went over the peak of the hill like I had done 1,000 times before, and the road appeared on the other side exactly as it always did. Buildings, lanes, signs, cars, exits, all of it normal. That was maybe the most disturbing part. Nothing followed. No accident, no storm, no power outage, no strange news later, no explanation waiting for me. Just one impossible second in the middle of an ordinary drive. After it happened, I tried to reason my way through it. That is what most people do when they see something they cannot explain. Your mind starts building possible explanations, even weak ones, because almost anything feels better than accepting the impossible. I thought maybe it was sunlight reflecting off something, maybe a huge glass building or a truck mirror. But that did not explain the whole sky turning white, and it definitely did not explain the grid lines. I thought maybe it was a migraine aura, even though I had never experienced anything like that before. but it did not look like the descriptions of migraine vision problems I had heard about, and it was too tied to the sky in front of me. It was not around the edges of my vision. It was not inside my eyes, at least it did not feel that way. It looked like it was out there, above the road. I thought maybe I was tired. But I was awake, alert, and driving in traffic. I was not drifting off. I had no reason to hallucinate. And even if my brain had misfired for a split second, why would it create something so specific? A white flash like a computer reboot, with grid lines in the sky, exactly as I was looking over the peak of a hill where the sky filled my windshield. It felt too structured to be a random mistake in my vision. It felt like seeing behind a curtain. I know people use the phrase glitch in the Matrix jokingly sometimes. They use it when they experience déjà vu, or when something repeats strangely, or when they see a coincidence that feels too perfect. But that day, that phrase was the only one that made sense to me emotionally. I am not saying I know what reality is, or that we are living in a simulation, or that I have proof of anything. I do not have proof. I only have what I saw. But if someone asked me what it felt like, that is the phrase I would use. It felt like a glitch. It felt like the image of the world failed for 1 second and then corrected itself before anyone was supposed to notice. What still gets me is how brief it was. If something lasts a long time, you can study it. You can take in details. You can compare what you are seeing with what you know. But this happened so quickly that it left me with more of an imprint than a complete picture. A white flash, a digital feeling, grid lines. Then normal sky again. It was over before I could fully react, but not before I saw enough to know it was not normal. That is a frustrating kind of memory, because it gives you no chance to prove it, no chance to check, no chance to ask someone beside you, are you seeing this? It happens, it disappears, and then you are left alone with a question. I have gone over that same section of freeway many times since then. Every time I approach that hill, I think about it. Even if I try not to, the memory comes back. I start watching the sky more carefully as the road rises. I look for strange reflections, weird light patterns, anything that might explain what I saw that day. But it has never happened again. The incline is still the same. The view is still mostly sky when you climb toward the peak. The traffic still moves the same way. But the flash has never returned. No grid lines, no white reset, no second glimpse behind whatever I saw. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else on that freeway saw it and simply did not react in a visible way. Maybe another driver somewhere nearby had the same moment of fear and also looked around, thinking they were the only one. Maybe they went home and told someone, and no one believed them. Maybe they still remember it too. Or maybe I really was the only person who saw it, because for some reason it lined up only with my eyes, my windshield, my angle, my exact position on that hill. That thought is almost more unsettling. Why me? Why that moment? Why show me something like that for less than a second and then take it away? I do not talk about it often because it sounds unbelievable. I know how it sounds when someone says the sky flashed like a computer reboot and they saw grid lines. It sounds like something from science fiction, or like someone trying to make an ordinary moment seem mysterious. But I am not exaggerating for effect. I am describing it the best way I can. It happened in the middle of the afternoon, on a crowded freeway, in a place I knew well, during a drive I had made countless times. It was not a dream. It was not late at night. I was not alone on some empty road where fear could build out of silence and darkness. I was surrounded by people, surrounded by cars, in full daylight, and that somehow makes it stranger. To this day, I wonder if I really did see a glitch in the Matrix. Maybe there is a simple explanation I have never found. Maybe it was light, or my eyes, or some rare atmospheric effect that only looked unnatural from my position. I am willing to admit that. I know memory can be strange, and I know the human brain tries to make patterns out of things it does not understand. But no explanation has ever fully satisfied me. The memory is too clear. The feeling was too strong. And those grid lines, even though they were only there for a blink, have stayed with me ever since. All I know is that I was driving up that hill, looking at the sky over the peak like I had done 1,000 times before when the sky suddenly flashed white. For one impossible moment, it looked like the world had rebooted. I saw what looked like grid lines behind the sky. Then everything snapped back to normal, and nobody around me seemed to notice. The freeway kept moving. The drivers kept driving. The sky stayed blue. And I kept going too, because what else could I do? But a part of me has been stuck on that hill ever since, staring at that white flash and wondering what I really saw. There was a church around the corner from my house in Richmond Hill, Queens, near 115th Street and Atlantic Avenue. It was one of those places I had passed so many times that I almost stopped noticing it in a normal way. When you grow up near a certain building, especially something like a church, it becomes part of the background of your life. You know where it is without thinking. You know the shape of it, the street around it, the way it looks in different weather, and the way the area feels during the day compared to late at night. That church was just there, always sitting in the neighborhood like a fixed point. I'd seen people walking around it, cars passing by it, lights on or off around it, and nothing about it had ever felt strange enough to make me afraid. But after one night, I could never think about that place the same way again. Even now, years later, I can still picture the street, the road, the car, my brother beside me, and the figure we saw moving toward that church. I do not remember every ordinary thing from that time in my life, but I remember that encounter with a sharpness that has never faded. It is one of those memories that feels less like something from the past and more like something that is still happening somewhere inside your mind. That night, I was in a car with my brother, and we were traveling near 95th Avenue. I do not remember anything special about where we were going before it happened. That is the strange thing about memories like this. The normal parts fade away, but the impossible part stays clear. I cannot tell you exactly what we were talking about before we saw him. I cannot remember if the radio was on, or if there was traffic, or if we were in a rush. Those details are gone, or at least they are not strong anymore. What I do remember is the feeling of being in the car, looking out at the street, and suddenly seeing something that made the whole world feel wrong. It was not a slow realization at first. It was more like my eyes saw it before my brain could explain it. For a second, I simply looked, and then a cold fear moved through my body so fast that I could barely react. The streets around that area can feel busy and normal during the day, but at certain times, especially when the light is low and the roads are quieter, they can feel different. Streetlights can make everything look yellow and strange. Shadows stretch across sidewalks. Storefronts and houses that look harmless in daylight can seem closed off and watchful. The car windows turn the outside world into something slightly distant, like you were watching a scene from behind glass. I was sitting there with my brother, feeling safe in the ordinary way you feel safe inside a car, when I looked to our right and saw what I first thought was a man. I say man because that was the closest word my mind could find, but even in the first second, I knew he was not like any normal person I had ever seen. He was pale, Not just light skin, not just a person wearing white clothes under a streetlight, but pale in a way that looked empty, almost without color. His skin, or whatever I was seeing as skin, looked drained. There was no natural warmth to him. He looked like all the blood and life had been taken out of him, leaving only this blank, colorless figure moving through the street. What made it worse were his eyes. They were huge and bright. I do not mean his eyes caught the light in a normal way, like when a person's glasses reflect headlights or when someone looks at you under a lamp. These eyes seemed too bright for the rest of him. They stood out immediately, and once I noticed them, I could not stop staring. They were large, shining, and unnatural. I remember thinking that no person should have eyes like that. They were not comforting or human. They were bright in a way that made my body understand danger before my mind could make sense of it. He was wearing something white, a robe or maybe a large cloak. It was bright white, and it covered him in a way that made his body's shape harder to understand. The clothing looked loose, like it was hanging around him, but there was nothing casual about it. It did not look like a coat someone would wear outside. It did not look like normal clothing. It looked old, almost ceremonial, like something from another time or from a dream. The whiteness of it made him stand out against the street and the darkness around him. Everything else seemed dull compared to it. The road, the buildings, the sidewalks, the parked cars, all of it became background. He was the only thing my eyes wanted to focus on because he looked completely out of place in the world we were driving through. At first, I thought he was walking toward the church. That would have been strange enough by itself because there was something wrong with the way he moved. But then I realized he was not walking like a normal person. I could not see the natural movement of steps. His body was moving forward, but not in the way people move when their feet hit the ground. It looked smooth, too smooth. He seemed to be floating. I know how that sounds, and I know people often use the word floating when they mean someone was walking lightly or gliding in a long robe. But this was different. I did not see the normal rise and fall of a person walking. I did not see the casual shift of weight from one foot to the other. He was moving toward our direction and toward the church as if he was being pulled along without effort. His robe or cloak moved with him, but I do not remember his feet clearly. I remember the motion, the pale shape, the bright eyes, and the horrible feeling that what I was seeing was not bound to the ground the way we were. My brother saw him too. That is one of the reasons I have never been able to dismiss it as my imagination. If I had been alone, maybe over the years I would have tried to tell myself I was tired, or that the street light hit someone in a strange way, or that my mind added details later. But I was not alone. My brother was there, and he reacted immediately. He did not slow down to get a better look. He did not laugh or ask what that was. He quickly sped off. That reaction told me everything. He had seen enough to know he did not want to be near it. The car moved faster, and the figure slipped out of our view as we got away from that spot. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence inside the car felt heavy. It was like we both needed time to understand that the other person had seen the same thing. Then my brother asked me if I had seen that person. The way he asked it made me even more scared because there was something in his voice. He was not asking casually. He was checking. He wanted to know if he had really seen what he thought he had seen, or if he was the only one. I said yes. I had seen him too. But as soon as I said it, I realized I was trembling. My body was shaking like I had been standing outside in the middle of winter with no coat on. It was not a normal little shiver. It was deep and uncontrollable, like the fear had gotten into my bones. The car was not freezing. I was not physically out in the cold, but I felt cold all over. My hands, my arms, my chest, everything felt like it had been shocked. I could not stop trembling because my body had reacted to that figure as if it had seen something that did not belong among the living. My brother, for reasons I still do not fully understand, wanted to go back and see it again. Maybe he wanted proof. Maybe he wanted to make sense of it. Maybe curiosity hit him once we were a little farther away and the first panic had passed. Sometimes people do that when something impossible happens. They get scared, they run, and then a few moments later they need to go back, because not knowing feels worse. I did not want to go back. Everything in me wanted to keep driving away and never look toward that church again. But my brother turned the car around. I remember that turn clearly, because my fear changed during it. When we were speeding away, I was scared of what we had seen. When we turned back, I became scared of what we might see again. As we drove back toward the area, I stared out, looking for him even though I did not want to find him. My whole body was tense. I expected to see the white robe, the pale face, those bright eyes, or that strange floating movement coming toward us again. I expected him to be closer. I expected him to be standing in the road, or at the church, or watching us from the sidewalk. In my mind, there was no safe version of finding him again. If he was still there, that meant what we saw was real and still present. If he had moved closer, that would have been worse. If he looked at us directly, I do not know what I would have done. But when we got back, he was gone. There was no sign of him anywhere. The road looked normal again. The area around the church looked ordinary, or as ordinary as it could after what we had just seen. We looked around. We waited for a while, expecting maybe he would appear from behind something, or that we would see him continuing down the street. But there was nothing. No pale man, no white robe, no huge bright eyes, no floating figure moving toward the church. He had disappeared completely, and that made it even worse in a way. A normal person cannot just vanish like that. Not in the short amount of time between us speeding away and turning back. There should have been some sign of him. If he had been walking, he should have still been nearby. If he had entered the church, we might have seen a door open or close, or seen some movement. If he had turned down a side street, we might have caught a glimpse. But there was nothing at all. It was as if he had only appeared long enough for us to see him, and then he was gone. We sat there for a while, watching and waiting. I do not know exactly how long. Time felt strange after that. It could have been a few minutes, but it felt longer because every second was full of fear and expectation. I kept looking at the same areas over and over, trying to find a normal explanation. Maybe it was a person in costume. Maybe it was someone coming from some event. Maybe the robe was just a coat. Maybe the bright eyes were some kind of reflection. But none of those explanations fit what I saw. They did not fit the way he moved. They did not fit the way he looked. They did not fit the way my body reacted before I had time to think. And they did not explain how he disappeared so quickly. My brother and I both knew we had seen something. We might not have had the words for it, but we knew. The strange thing about seeing something like that with another person is that it makes the experience both more real and harder to talk about. You cannot simply file it away as a trick of your own mind because someone else witnessed it too. But at the same time, talking about it too much can make it feel even stranger. There is a point where you realize that no amount of discussion will give you a clear answer. We saw a pale figure in a bright white robe or cloak with huge shining eyes, moving in a way that looked like floating, heading toward a church around the corner from my house. Then, he vanished. That is all there is. No explanation came after. No big reveal. No answer. What stays with me most is how vividly I remember him. Some memories fade with time, even important ones. Faces blur, places change, small details disappear. But this memory has stayed clear. I can still see the whiteness of the robe. I can still see the pale, almost colorless look of the figure. I can still feel the shock of those bright eyes. I can still remember the way my brother sped off, the way he asked if I had seen that person, and the way I sat there trembling like I had been thrown into freezing air. I can still feel the dread when we turned around, and the emptiness of the street when the figure was gone. It is strange how one short moment can stay with you for so long. The whole encounter probably lasted less than a minute, but it has lived in my mind for years. I do not know what that man was. I still put the word in quotes because calling him a man does not feel right, even now. He had the shape of one, but not the presence of one. He looked like something that had taken the outline of a person without fully becoming human. Maybe he was connected to the church. Maybe he was something old that belonged to that area. Maybe he was a spirit, or something people would call an apparition. Maybe he was something else entirely, something that only appeared for a few seconds on that road near 95th Avenue, near 115th Street and Atlantic Avenue, where my brother and I happened to be passing at the wrong time. I have thought about it many times, and I still do not have a better answer. All I know is that we saw him. We saw that pale figure in white moving toward the church, not walking like a normal person, but floating in our direction with those huge, bright eyes. My brother saw him and reacted before I even had time to speak. I saw him and shook so hard it felt like winter had entered my body. We went back to look again, and he was gone. There was no trace, no person, no sound, nothing. The street had returned to normal, but I had not. That encounter stayed with me, and I remember it as clearly as if it happened only moments ago. When I was somewhere between 12 and 14 years old, I had a close friend who lived in Falls Church, Virginia. Her family lived in this huge Victorian house that always felt much older than the people inside it. Even as a kid, before I really knew much about architecture or history, I could tell that house was not like the normal homes other people lived in. It had that tall, heavy-look old houses have, with high windows, dark corners, long hallways, and rooms that seemed to hold on to the past in a way I could not explain at the time. I remember thinking it looked like the kind of house you would see in an old painting or a ghost story, something grand and beautiful from the outside, but strange and serious once you stepped through the door. Her family had owned it for a very long time. It was not just a house they had bought recently because they liked old homes. It had been in their family for generations, passed down from one person to the next, carrying all of their memories with it. I was young, so I did not ask as many questions as I probably would now. Kids often accept things as they are, even when those things are odd. But I did know one thing about that house, because my friend had mentioned it more than once. Like many of the original homes in that area, her family's house had been used during the Revolutionary War as a kind of emergency infirmary and command base. At that age, I did not fully understand what that meant. I knew the Revolutionary War was old history, something from school books, with soldiers, generals, battles, and all of that. But I did not think too deeply about what it would mean for a private home to suddenly become a place where injured men were brought, where decisions were made, where people might have suffered or died. Now, as an adult, that part hits me differently. A house does not go through something like that without taking on some kind of weight. At least that is how it felt in that place. I know some people do not believe houses can hold memories, and maybe they are right. Maybe it is just old wood, old rooms, old smells, and a child's imagination putting things together. But I can only explain what I felt when I was there. Certain parts of that house had an energy that was almost physical. It was not just that the place was creepy because it was old. It was more than creaking floors or dusty corners. There were areas where the air felt thicker, where the temperature would shift, where the room itself seemed to notice you walking in. It felt like something had been left behind, not fully alive, but not fully gone either. One bedroom in the house would randomly smell like cigar smoke. It was not all the time, which somehow made it worse. If it had always smelled like smoke, you could blame the walls or old furniture or some previous owner who smoked constantly. But this smell came and went. It usually appeared in the middle of the afternoon when there was no obvious reason for it. You could walk by that room earlier in the day and smell nothing. Then pass it later, and suddenly there it was, thick and sharp, like someone had just been sitting in there with a cigar. It did not smell faint or old either. It smelled fresh enough that I would look around expecting to see smoke curling in the air, or some adult hiding in a chair by the window. But there was never anyone there. No open window bringing in a neighbor's smoke. No ashtray. No cigar. Just the smell, hanging in the room like somebody invisible had settled in for a quiet afternoon. The sitting room was another place I hated. It was always freezing. Not just cool, not just drafty in the normal way old houses can be, but cold in a way that made no sense. You could step into it from a warmer hallway and feel the temperature drop right away, like walking into a room that had been closed off from the sun for years. It was also strangely quiet. Sounds did not travel in there properly. If people were talking in another part of the house, their voices seemed to soften when you entered that room. Even the air felt still. It gave me the heebie-jeebies every single time. There was something about the curtains in that room that made me uncomfortable. I always felt like someone was watching me from behind them. I know how that sounds. Curtains are curtains. But in that room, I could not shake the feeling that if I turned my head too quickly, I would catch a face or a shape pulling back into the folds of the fabric. I never did, but the feeling was strong enough that I avoided standing with my back to them. I would sit on the edge of a chair if I had to be in there, pretending to be normal, while inside I was counting the seconds until I could leave. There was also a garden reception area, and in a normal house, it probably would have been one of the prettiest rooms. It had this beautiful domed glass, and when the sun came through it, the whole room should have been bright and warm. It looked like the kind of place where people might have had tea, or plants, or family gatherings. But that room was rarely used. Even on the brightest, sunniest days, it never seemed to warm up. The light would pour through the glass, but somehow the heat did not come with it. The room stayed cold and uncomfortable, like the sunshine was only touching the surface and not really entering. As a child, I only knew that I did not like being in there for long. As an adult, I have wondered if maybe that area had been used for sick patients, maybe even tuberculosis patients, because of the glass and the way the room was set apart. I do not know that for sure, and I never asked enough questions back then to confirm it, but that is the thought that comes back to me now. It would make sense in a terrible way. That room had the feeling of a place where people had waited, suffered, and maybe never left. Of course, old houses make noises. I understand that. I know old wood shifts. Doors can swell when the air is damp and shrink when it is dry. Hinges can loosen. Floors can creak under their own weight. A house built that long ago is going to have odd behavior, and not every strange thing is paranormal. But the door to my friend's bedroom was different. That door constantly swung open by itself. It did not just drift open once or twice because of a draft. It happened so often that my friend barely reacted to it. We would be in her room talking, playing, or getting ready for a sleepover, and the door would slowly open. Sometimes it happened when we were not paying attention, and we would look up and see it standing wide open. Other times, we would see the handle move first, or hear the click of the latch. It was the kind of thing that should have scared her, but it did not. She treated it like a normal part of living in that house. One night during a sleepover, it happened in a way that scared me and the other girls badly. We had closed the door. I remember that clearly because we wanted privacy, the way kids do during a sleepover. I am almost certain it had been latched, and I remember thinking it was fully shut. Then, at some point, the door unlocked itself. There was that little sound, that click, that does not seem loud in normal life, but becomes terrifying when you know nobody is supposed to be touching it. Then, the door opened. I do not mean it opened because someone pushed it from the outside and walked in. It opened by itself. The other girls and I were terrified. We froze, then started whispering and panicking, asking if somebody was there. But my friend was calm, almost bored by it. She said it was just her grandfather's spirit coming to check on her. According to her, he had died in the room next to hers. She did not call him grandfather in those moments, though. She called him Mr. Scrump, after Lilo's strange little doll from Lilo and Stitch. It was such a childish, silly name that it should have made the situation less scary, but it did not. Somehow, the fact that she had given this presence a nickname made it feel even more real, like it was a known part of the household. I even heard her grandmother scold him once. That is one of the details that has stayed with me because it was so casual. Her grandmother was not frightened. She sounded annoyed, the way someone might sound if a family member had left lights on or forgotten to close a cabinet. I heard her telling him off for leaving doors open all over the house. She spoke as if she expected him to hear her. And everyone acted like that was normal. In any other house, if someone's grandmother started talking to a dead man about open doors, I think the whole room would go quiet. But in that house, it was just another moment. That was how they lived. They had accepted certain things. They did not treat the house as empty, even when no living person was there. But the worst part of that house was not the cigar room, or the freezing sitting room, or the garden area, or even the door that opened by itself. The worst part was the cellar. By the time I knew my friend, the cellar had been renovated into a living unit for her older sister and her husband. It was not just a storage basement with boxes and pipes. Someone had turned it into a place where people could actually live. But that did not make it feel safe. I only went down there once, and once was enough. The stairs were narrow and steep, the kind that make you feel like you are descending into a place the house does not really want you to enter. The air changed as soon as I started down. It felt heavier, cooler, and closer, like the walls were leaning in. At the base of the stairs was their living room. To the right was the laundry room. From where I was on the stairs, I could see the light from the living room spreading across part of the floor, but the laundry room was darker. I had just started to step down into the living room when my friend's older sister shouted at me to stay on the stairs. Her voice was sharp, urgent, and serious. It was not the kind of warning you ignore. I stopped immediately, and right then, an empty laundry basket flew past the space where I would have been standing if I had taken another step. It did not tip over. It did not slide. It flew past. The thing moved with force, like someone had thrown it. It crossed the area in front of me, right where my body would have been. I remember the shock of it, the instant understanding that if her sister had not yelled, it might have hit me. The basket landed or crashed somewhere nearby, and for a second, I could not breathe. My brain tried to make sense of it, but there was no normal explanation I could reach for. There was no one standing there holding a basket. No one had thrown it from behind. It had come from the direction of the laundry room. Her older sister told me I had to introduce myself. She said new people had to ask for permission. She said it in a firm way, like this was a rule everyone in the house knew and followed. I remember feeling embarrassed, which sounds strange now. I was terrified, but there was also this sudden awkwardness, like I had walked into someone's room without knocking. It felt like I had broken a rule I did not know existed. Then I looked toward the laundry room, and that was when I saw it. There was a shadow standing there. It is hard to explain what I mean by shadow, because this was not just a darker patch in a dark room. The living room light reached into that area enough that I should have been able to see shapes and details, but this thing was darker than everything around it. It was not flat against the wall. It was standing upright within the light, and it was the deepest black I have ever seen. It looked at least 7 feet tall. It had the general shape of a person, but without clear features. No face that I could make out. No eyes, no clothes, just a tall, solid darkness where there should not have been one. It was like the light refused to touch it. That is the only way I can describe it. The room had light, but the shadow remained completely black. The feeling that shot through me was unlike anything I had felt before. It was hot and cold at the same time. My body reacted before my thoughts did. My skin prickled, my stomach dropped, and I felt this strange pressure in my chest, like some deep part of me knew I was looking at something that was not supposed to be there. I am usually the sort of person who tries to face what scares me. Even as a kid, I did not like backing down from fear. But I could not step down into that room. I could not give it my name. I could not make myself speak to it. My friend's sister wanted me to introduce myself, to ask permission. But the words would not come. I just stayed on the stairs, frozen, staring at that tall, black figure in the laundry room. Her older sister seemed used to it, or at least more used to it than I was. She said she thought it might have been a doctor, a nurse, or maybe some kind of ranking military official who had died there. Because of the house's history, any of those possibilities seemed possible to her. She said it was polite, but only if you were respectful first. That was the rule. Respect it, and it would mostly leave you alone. Disrespect it, and it could become difficult. Her husband, who was down there too, made some comment that it could be a real jerk, or something close to that. The moment he said it, she told him to knock it off. She sounded genuinely upset with him for being disrespectful. Then she actually apologized to the shadow man. She spoke toward the laundry room like the thing was listening. Maybe it was. I do not know. I never crossed the threshold. I stayed on the stairs the entire time. I sat there because standing felt too exposed, but I did not dare go any farther down. From that spot, her sister told me stories about how they had learned to live with whatever was down there. She said it was a nuisance sometimes. It moved things, reacted to people, and made its presence known. But she also said it had rules. It did not tolerate her husband raising his voice. If he got too loud or angry, things would happen. Objects would move. The atmosphere would change. It was almost like the shadow had appointed itself some kind of authority over the space. Her husband did not seem to love that, but he also did not act like she was making it up. He knew it was there. They both did. This was not a story they told for fun. It was part of their daily life in that basement apartment. The strangest part was that, as much as the shadow was frightening and difficult, her sister believed it had protected them once. She said there had been a break-in several years earlier, or at least an attempted one, and whatever was down there had somehow stopped it or scared the intruder away. I do not remember every detail she gave, but I remember the certainty in her voice. She believed that this thing, whatever it was, had protected them. That made it even harder for me to understand. It was not simply evil in their minds. It was not friendly either. It was something old, stern, territorial, and dangerous if you did not respect it. That was how they spoke about it. Like it was a person with moods and boundaries, not just a ghostly shape. Later, my friend told me that animals could not live down there. The family dog would not go near the cellar stairs. He would not put one paw on them. He would stand at the top, barking and growling, staring down into the darkness like he could see something that people could not always see. No matter how much anyone tried, he refused to go down. That detail scared me, because animals do not care about family stories. They do not care about old history or ghost rumors. They react to what they sense. And that dog sensed something down there that he wanted no part of. That house had many strange areas, and I had felt uncomfortable in several of them, but the cellar was different. The cellar felt occupied, not haunted in the distant, dreamy way people talk about old homes being haunted. It felt actively watched and guarded. The cigar smoke, the cold rooms, the doors opening, Mr. Scrump checking on my friend, all of that was unsettling. But the shadow in the laundry room was the only thing I ever saw with my own eyes that I truly believed was paranormal. I have never seen anything like it before or since, and honestly, I hope I never do again. Once was more than enough for me. I was a kid standing on those steep cellar stairs, looking at a black shape that should not have been standing inside the light, while adults around me spoke to it like it belonged there. That memory has stayed with me all these years because it was not vague, and it was not just a feeling. I saw it. I felt it. I watched an empty laundry basket fly past the spot where I would have been standing. And I knew in that moment that some places are not empty just because you cannot see anyone there. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open, and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.